By the end of the 1930s, the scent of war hung thick in the air. Many speculated that this war, being fought on the other side of the world, could spill over Pacific shores. True enough, Japan launched a surprise attack on the Philippines on December 8, 1941. Filipino and American troops defended the country until they can't anymore, and Manila was declared an open city to prevent its total destruction. The Japanese military authorities organized a new government structure for the Philippines, and in October 1943, Japan bestowed upon the Philippines its independence. A new Philippine Republic was inaugurated. But is this the independence Filipinos have long sought and fought for? Let's talk about the Second Philippine Republic and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines through the inaugural address of President Jose P. Laurel on October 14, 1943. This is Podcasts, Conversations on Philippine History, Politics, and Society.
O diba last episode, reklamo, ngayon naman digmaan, diba? So ito yung mga tema ng mga episode natin. No? So ako si Aaron.
I am also very excited to talk about this topic kasi napakaraming misconceptions yung meron tungkol sa mga nangyari ng World War II. So magandang araw sa inyong lahat. Ako si Vec.
And I'm Lee. At dito nga sa episode na ito, pag-uusapan natin itong World War II in the Philippines, the Second Philippine Republic, and Jose P. Laurel. Usually kasi footnote lang talaga sa klase itong period na ito sa Philippine history. Pero very interesting ito at lalo na sa akin kasi yung master thesis ko at yung dissertation ko touched upon this period in history. Pero yun nga, tama si Beck, daming misconceptions sa period na ito kahit na maikli lang siya. Maikli pero very decisive.
Yeah, totoo yun. No? Imagine, diba, kaya minsan yung title sa mga Philippine textbooks nito, minsan Japanese interlude, no? Yung mga ganung
interregnum, ganyan.
Madrama, interregnum, mga madramang title kasi relatively it is shorter compared to other critical junctures in our history, pero napaka momentous at napaka daming nangyari din nung panahon na yun, no? So, ito ano ba, hindi naman to misconception. Pero siguro lesser known fact lang din, no? Kasi 'di ba lagi nating sinasabi na after the war, ang nangyayari minsan sa periodization ng Philippine history, palaging lumalabas, no, after the war, Third Republic. Lagi kong tanong yun sa klase, ba't may biglang Third Republic? Nasaan yung first, second, diba? Medyo confusing siya in a way sa iba. Halimbawa, ngayon, yung tanong, anong republic na ba tayo? To put it simply, no, yung First Philippine Republic ay yung short-lived Malolos Republic, inaugurated sa Borosane Church noong 1899. Yung Second Republic ay yung inaugurated under the auspices of the Japanese, yung binanggit sa introduction natin kanina. And then yung Third Republic ay yung republic after the war. And then the Fourth Republic ay mula naman nung malift yung martial law noong 1981 hanggang sa snap elections noong 1986. Siguro mas madidiscuss natin yan in the future. And finally, the Fifth Republic ay mula nung magkaroon ng 1987 Constitution hanggang sa kasalukuyan. So at present, we are at the Fifth Republic. So kung matuloy yung pangarap nila na revolutionary government, baka magka-6, diba? So hindi natin alam. No?
So knock on wood, sabi nga nila, wag naman. Ano? Pero yun, that's a different topic. Dito muna tayo sa Second Republic. At ito, siguro maganda rin ma-point out na nilabel ng mga Japanese na Second Republic, yung republic nila Laurel, kasi para siyang itinuring na continuation ng First Republic. In a way, parang ine-enliven nila yung legacy ng mga nationalists natin, revolutionary heroes supposedly. And in effect, they discredited the American period, yung buong period na yun, simula nung natapos yung Philippine-American War hanggang pumasok ang mga Hapones sa Pilipinas noong ikalawang digmaang pandaigdig nga. Pero itong Second Republic na to, madalas ay tinatawag itong puppet government. And if you call a government a puppet government, this is endowed with an outward symbol of authority. Pero another entity exercises the real direction and control. At iyan din naman talaga yung naging kaso or naging sitwasyon noong Second Republic kung tawagin. It was actually a Japanese-sponsored government. But for people to say that it was a puppet republic without understanding the nuances of the period, would actually be an oversimplification.
It is. And I dare say, hindi lang siya oversimplification. Kung disservice din, especially for those Filipino officials who stayed and did everything they could to manage the Japanese and protect the Filipinos through diplomacy. Kasi sino ba namang gagawa nun, di ba? Kailangan talaga may maiwan.
True.
Maraming dynamics at complexities itong period na ito, and it is difficult to divide Filipinos between just heroes who chose to fight and collaborators who supported the Japanese. The least we can do is to understand the events during this period and the different ways by which the Filipinos fought Japan during the war.
I agree. And I like it that our primary source in this episode actually is a speech. Itong speech na to ay ready available sa internet kasi napapag-usapan na nga natin dati na ang hirap makahanap ng primary sources on Philippine history online. No? So, yung speeches are very important historical sources din, especially from Philippine presidents, halimbawa. No? So kasi policy setting yun yung mga ganong klase ng sources, di ba? Tapos syempre, galing siya sa highest office. No? So, at least from a time na Philippine presidents were still at least lucid and coherent pagdating sa speeches.
Nakakamiss, no? Mga ganun panahon.
Nakakamiss.
Nagme-make sense. Yung tatapos yung sentences. Diba? Nagme-make sense yung speeches.
Yung abangan mo yung transcript kasi ang ganda ng prose, yung mga ganun.
Anyway, para sa akin, interesting itong independence sponsored by Japan. Kasi nga naman, if you were to look at the events decades prior, talagang ang main preoccupation ng mga Pilipino, or mas tama siguro ay ang Philippine elite, ay independence, yung mga independence mission. So, naisip siguro ng mga Japanese na, edi ibigay natin sa kanila yung gusto nila. So, ito, independence.
Yeah, no? So, 'di ba kasi again, siguro yung context din kasi noon, 'di ba? The Japanese came with the idea that they were liberating the Philippines from American colonization. Pero kasi nga 'di ba, nangyayari na yung transition period ng Commonwealth. So, we are on our way to independence. So, yung packaging din talaga nila noon na parang, hey Filipinos, Asian brothers, look at us giving you your independence. Samantalang yung United States, nagkaroon pa kayo ng reklamo dahil parang papunta na dun pero naudlot ulit. Ang tagal kayong pinaghintay pero eto kami, bibigay na namin sa inyo.
At yung juxtaposition na yan, that's one of the cornerstones of Japanese propaganda. So the propaganda line is something like, Filipinos, the West did you wrong. So to correct this mistake, you need to dig deep to go back to your Oriental roots as Filipinos. And, here we are, Japan, your neighbors, who will lead you back to your Filipino identity. At alam nilang independence yung main preoccupation ng mga Pilipino ng mga panahon na to. Kasi mula pa noong himagsikan, may attempt na ang Katipunan na mag-reach out to Japan to solicit aid, di ba? Tapos noong US occupation naman, the Japanese kept tabs on Filipinos and their relationship with the United States. So it was clear that they have been studying Filipinos even before the war. So aware sila kung ano yung national conversations bago dumating ang digmaan. Kaya naman, yung diskurso ng Kalayaan, the Japanese really capitalized on that.
Kasi yung trope talaga ng mga Hapon during this time, 'di ba? Yung Asia for Asians. Kaya lang parang napansin nila na yung mga Pilipino hindi masyadong nag-identify sa kanilang Asian roots kumbaga. So they had to capitalize on a stronger sentiment na at this time siguro na realize nila ay nationalism. Kaya talagang yun nga, tulad ng binanggit kanina, ay they tried to enliven these nationalist sentiments na supposedly dapat na-offend nung panahon ng mga Amerikano. Doon sila nag-bank on. And there were several things that had to be done before giving the Filipinos independence. First, the political parties were banned. Yung binabanggit natin last episode na may mga nabuong political parties in the process of the American democratic tutelage. These were banned and instead, the Japanese created the kapisanan ng paglilingkod sa bagong Pilipinas o yung tinatawag natin na Kalibapi. So, Kalibapi was there to replace all political parties. And through the Kalibapi, the Preparatory Committee for Philippine Independence was created. At dinraft nila yung 1943 Philippine Constitution. So, after the Kalibapi ratified the Constitution, they elected the members of the new National Assembly, and then the National Assembly elected Jose Laurel as president.
Pero bakit nga ba si Laurel ang napili nilang maging presidente? Kasi syempre dapat may concurrence or pagsang-ayon muna yan ng mga Hapon.
Oo.
And the Japanese apparently trusted him even before the war. For many reasons. One, Laurel has a son who studied at the Imperial Military Academy in Tokyo. Another is that Laurel himself has an honorary doctorate from Tokyo University. And Laurel is already close with Japanese officials. And finally, together with Eusebio Vargas, Laurel was already in Quezon's cabinet. And in fact, they were instructed by Quezon himself to stay behind para i-welcome yung mga Japanese kasi somebody had to do it, right? Laurel is also known to be anti-US, so plus points din yan for the Japanese. So he was the no-brainer choice for the position of president by the Japanese.
Grabe, no? Parang itong mga to, after nung digmaan, ay pinaratangan ng mga collaborator. Pero kung tutuusin, Quezon actually told them to, sige, dyan na muna kayo, punta na muna kami sa Australia habang umaatake yung mga Hapon. Parang they were really left on their own devices para harapin yung mga Hapones.
And interesting din na nitong pumutok ang digmaan noong 1941, Quezon was fresh from a re-election. It was barely a month when Quezon won his unprecedented second partial term as president. Yet he chose not to stay and instead to commission members of his cabinet to bargain with the Japanese and whatever they intend to do with the Philippines. Let's look at how Jose Laurel described Philippine independence under Japan in the opening of his inauguration speech.
This is the hour of fulfillment of the supreme aspiration of our people for centuries. It is but fitting that we should, on this momentous occasion, dedicate a prayer of thanksgiving to those who paid the full price of blood and treasure for the freedom which we have now achieved. Rest at long last in your hallowed graves, immortal heroes of Filipino race. The long night of vigil has ended. You have not died in vain. The spirit of Mactan, of Balintawak, of Bagong Bayan, of Malolos and Bataan lives again. The republic we are consecrating today was born in the midst of a total war. Our countryside was transformed into a gory battlefield to become a historic landmark of that titanic conflict. From the crucible of a world in turmoil was unleashed the mighty forces that were spelled the liberation of Asiatic peoples from foreign domination. Today, as we witnessed the triumphal realization of our national ideal, we would be sadly wanting in those magnanimous qualities which distinguished a noble and valiant race if we did not forgive the wounds and havoc inflicted by that war, the emulation of our youth with their golden promise of the future, the untold sufferings and privations undergone by our innocent population. This is no time for indulging in unseemly recriminations or for ventilating our grievances. In all dignity and out of the fullness of our hearts, we could do no less than acknowledge before the world our debt of honor to the august virtue of His Majesty, the Emperor of Nippon, for ordaining the holy war and hastening the day of our national deliverance.
Oh, 'di ba? The drama, 'di ba? Ramdam na ramdam natin. I love how this was written, 'di ba? Independence as quote unquote the fulfillment of the supreme aspiration of our people for centuries, 'di ba? So, parang ang chilling nung words na halimbawa yung rest at long last in your hallowed graves, immortal heroes of the Filipino race, 'di ba? Pang slogan making contest, 'di ba? Pero talagang 'di ba? Ito nga yung sinasabi natin kanina na nung napaka-eloquent ng mga presidente ng Pilipinas.
Totoo yan, ang ganda nga. There was a time talaga, when Philippine presidents and their staff are eloquent. Siyempre, hindi naman tayo sure kung si Laurel talaga nagsulat nito, pero baka siya nga. Mabalik ako dun sa quote natin kanina. No? Interesting para sa akin yung pagbanggit sa Mactan, Balintawak, Bagong Bayan, Malolos, at Bataan. Kung maglalaro tayo ng odd one out, alin ang naiba dito sa mga lugar na nabanggit na ito?
Oo nga, parang ang weird nung inclusion ng Bataan. I mean, especially considering the context, di ba? Parang, I wonder how it was framed during that time. Kasi Bataan fell to the Japanese. So, it's a Japanese victory and actually a loss for the Filipinos and the Americans. Yet, we memorialize the fall of Bataan as a sign of sacrifice ng mga Filipino nung digmaan. So parang ano ba yan? Shade ba yan?
Kaya nga 'di ba, ang tingin ay parang dapat hindi Fall of Bataan kundi Day of Valor. Baka nga
So it
din
could work
kasi
both ways.
oo, 'di ba? Baka nga din kasi it's still fresh nung time na yon. And while the Japanese could count it as their win, the Filipinos could of course count it as a necessary sacrifice. Kaya nga siya ngayon 'di ba ang tingin ay Day of Valor kasi ang tinitingnan doon yung valiant stance ng mga tao na hindi sila basta-basta sumuko, 'di ba? So parang kumbaga in the same league as, Bagong Bayan where Rizal was executed.
I agree with that. It was just a curious inclusion how something so recent as Bataan was memorialized na agad sa words pa lang ni Laurel a year after it really became an important historical place. We also take note of Laurel thanking the Japanese emperor for, quote-unquote, ordaining the Holy War and hastening the day of our national deliverance, which is something we expected since andun mismo yung mga Japanese military officials nung binabasa niya itong talumpating ito. And actually, we would expect more of that gratitude towards the Japanese. Pero interestingly, after mentioning the emperor in that paragraph and the Japanese military officials in another paragraph, wala nang mention of the Japanese. The rest of the speech was dedicated to what should be done as an independent nation during the war. So more on peace and order, a call for guerrilla fighters to surrender, developing the economy through agriculture, attaining self-sufficiency, and better education policies. Meron ding very curious assertions about women and family. And this is what Laurel had to say about it.
The family is the basic unit of society, and the breakdown of the family can only result in the disintegration of society. The consolidation of the authority of the paterfamilias, the cultivation of the Oriental values of filial piety and obedience, and the restoration of womanhood to its proper place in the home. This is a tripod which should not hold fast and elevate the Filipino family under the Republic. We cannot listen to the fads of modernism, which seek to flatter our women by giving them more freedom for their own undoing, without undermining the institution of the family. Nor can we deprive them of the rights they now enjoy, without turning back the clock to the days when they wore shackles, and were regarded as mere chattel. As we can neither advance nor retrocede, we have to maintain the rights which we have already conceded to our women, without impairing in any way the authority lodged in the head of the family to which they belong. This is inevitable because of the matriarchy of the primitive times has long since ceased to exist. In every social unit, there must always be a focal center of authority. And in the Filipino family, that epicenter has always been the father as the head of the first barangay. The Filipino woman must incarnate the purity and tenderness of Maria Clara, the solicitude and self-sacrifice of Tantang Sora, the fecundity and motherly love of Teodora Alonso. The home is her sovereign realm, and motherhood is the highest position to which she could aspire. She should look forward to the rearing of children as the consummation of her noblest mission in life. The young generation must suckle from her breasts, not only to the seeds of patriotism, but also those rudiments of familial discipline, which will imbue them with respect for their elders and obedience to constituted authority.
Ovek, anong masasabi mo?
Wow.
True.
Wow, sige na. Pero, well, nakaka-bother siya siyempre, pero hindi ako nagugulat dyan, ganyan naman talaga ang tingin sa kababaihan nung mga panahon na yan. In fact, ito ay very interesting, di ba binabanggit natin last episode na merong nabuong mga mass movement like the Sakdal movement against, anti-American siya, tapos anti-trapo din, anti-nationalista. Within this organization, merong mass-based women's organization na nabuo at ang tawag nila sa kanilang sarili ay Samahang Makabayan ng Mga Babaeng Pilipino or National League of Patriotic Women. So, nabuo ito before the war, parang 1937. Tapos, interesting to, kasi anti sila sa women's right to vote. Kasi niniwala sila na yung mga babae dapat ay mag-refrain from participating in politics, and they believe that, women's empowerment and gender equality were actually Western values. At ang kanilang nire-reminisce ng mga kababaihan, ayun nga, ito mga binanggit mismo, sila Tandang Sora, yan sila Maria Clara. So, very complicated din siya, parang nag-intersect yung, okay, women's organization sila na anti-imperialist. Parang may ganun silang trope. Alright? Pero yun nga, this is actually not surprising. Pero kahit may mga ganitong klaseng sentiment, meron na rin mga milestone on the women's movement during this time. Like yun nga, when the Filipino women attained the right to vote in 1937, at yun pang mga nabuong women's organization to sponsor this campaign. Ang lagi lang nating natandaan pagdating sa mga ganitong usapin ay time-bound, very time-bound, yung mga pag-iisip about the situation, the status of women in the society.
Ako, I was wondering if this appraisal of women, Filipino women, is an indication of the attempt of men to rein in on the women's movement for some reason, or the quote-unquote liberal ideas on womanhood during the US occupation. Kasi it's quite odd. Dahil na rin itong mga Hapon, they tried to showcase an image of the working women. Nung panahon ng Hapon, maraming roles yung kababaihan. Conductor sila ng mga bus, halimbawa. They work in factories. They work as nurses. Pero itong speech na ito, sinasabi, kayong kababaihan, dapat sa bahay kayo. It's just a weird contrast.
Yeah, nakakatawa nga din yung, halimbawa, yung isang particular quote na makikita rin natin yung, in a way, yung siguro limited state of knowledge ng time na yun about the Filipino pre-conquest period, yung mga, sa panahon ng mga sinaunang pamayanan. Kasi di ba sabi din ni Laurel, the epicenter of the family has always been the father as the head of the first barangay. Diba? Parang, san galing yun?
Invento.
Diba? Sabi ko, saan kaya ito galing? No? Parang hinugot kung saan. Anyway, towards the end of Laurel's speech, he tried to highlight the need for unity among Filipinos. At ito ang sinabi niya.
And no time in our history is a demand for unity amongst our people more urgent or more compelling. Only by presenting our compact and undivided front to all vital issues of the day can we hope to erect the foundations of a strong and enduring republic. I consider as rallying centers of our national unity the flag, the Constitution, the national anthem, and the President of the Republic. The flag because it symbolizes the sacrifices of our heroes and synthesizes our common imperishable tradition. The Constitution because it expresses our collective and sovereign will and embodies the sum of our political philosophy and experience. The national anthem because it epitomizes the trials and tribulations and crystallizes the longings and aspirations of our race. The President because he is the chosen leader of our people, directing and coordinating center of our government, and the visible personification of the state. For square on these rallying points, the dynamic instinct of racial solidarity, latent in the heart of each and every Filipino, must be roused from its lethargy and inflamed with the passion of faith and our common destiny as a people.
While we could generalize that, these statements could be true in any historical period, we must remember na before the inauguration, the flag wasn't allowed to be flown. So somehow, many of our heraldry, like the anthem even, was restricted to be displayed, to be shown, or to be played, at least the national anthem, before the inauguration of the Second Republic. So mahalagang mabanggit niya ni Laurel at hina-highlight niya actually.
Yeah, 'di ba? Parang ano siya, yung mga symbols of, nationalism and civic life, no? Like yung flag, national anthem, 'di ba? Dito mo makita na in a way talaga siguro may pangangailangan to lift the spirits of the Filipino people during that time, at kailangan mo ng mga symbols na yon to hold on to para makapagbuklod-buklod at mapalakas yung loob nung mga tao, 'di ba? Pero dito isa pang point dito when Laurel said that quote unquote the president is the chosen leader of our people. Which is weird kasi si Laurel hindi naman siya nanalo through an election, 'di ba? But through a contrived National Assembly. And this assembly itself was elected through the Kalibapi. So again, 'di ba, a reading of this statement could maybe make us rethink what Laurel meant by this statement. Could he be referring to Quezon, who in 1941 won his second term as president? No, parang mapapaisip ka rin na parang ano ba yung gustong sabihin.
Pwede ring basahin yan like that. But we can't really be certain. But what we are sure of is that Laurel, during his presidency, always called for unity. Yun ang theme ng speech niyang ito. At ng marami pang speeches. Kasi what else can you do? When Filipinos are dying and you are being watched by the Japanese, national survival depended on unity. And you really have to call for unity.
At yan ay talagang consistent din sa analysis ni Dr. Ricardo Jose, no? Yung
Dr. Ricardo Jose.
That's right. So, favorite natin. Favorite naming professor ng
True.
at foremost military historian ng World War II sa Pilipinas. So, sabi niya, Laurel was known for his efforts to protect his fellow Filipinos. Ang mga ginagawa niya, halimbawa, he was protesting to the Japanese embassy and military officials. Pinoprotesta niya yung mga incidences ng pananampal, pambubugbog, mga warrantless arrest, and other abuses committed by the Japanese. And of course, the Japanese never really acted upon it. But we could imagine how difficult this must have been for Laurel to even complain about it. I mean, talagang dapat ma-imagine natin kung gaano rin kahirap yung naging posisyon ni Jose P. Laurel at this juncture.
Actually, aware si Laurel na medyo nagiging negative yung image niya sa mga Pilipino. In fact, he has been the subject of a lot of attempts by assassination ng mga guerrilla fighters. And dapat siguro balanse pa rin yung pagtingin natin sa naging papel ni Laurel sa panahon na ito. At makikita rin natin na kahit na siya yung presidente ng Japanese-sponsored government, Laurel refused to declare war against the United States, arguing that the country has already suffered much. Bakit pa kailangan natin magdeklara ng digmaan? Nangyayari na yung digmaan di ba? Although, he did declare a state of war noong 1944. Sabi nga ni Professor Ricardo Jose, it wasn't really a declaration of war, and it was just a state of war, quote-unquote, carefully worded, a passive expression of reality. And this state of war didn't really have to be ratified by the National Assembly. So in that sense,
Talino, no?
Oo nga,
Diba,
parang
ang talino nun, diba?
Nakakamiss talaga yung matalinong mga presidente.
Diba? Na parang na-maneuver niya yun. Diba? Kasi
Oo.
minomonitor siya ng mga Japanese tapos sinabi sa kanya, declare war. Na parang, pero ang sinabi niya, there
We
is
are
a
in a
state of war.
Yeah.
Diba? So parang naitago niya.
magandang point yan, parang imagine, digmaan, pwede kang mamatay, pero ang linaw ng pag-iisip mo na na naiisip mo pa rin na hindi ko gagawin to kasi hindi ito yung nararamdaman ng mga Pilipino.
And I think
Correct.
Laurel was also, conscious of how history would judge him at this specific moment in his life, ano. So that's a very interesting aspect then to look at nung pag-iisip niya.
Yeah. Tsaka again, 'di ba? Para siyang dahil nga kanina nabanggit natin, 'di ba? May mga Filipino officials na kinailangang maiwan, 'di ba? So si Laurel yung isa dun sa mga officials na 'yon. Itong halimbawa ni Laurel, para kasi siyang caution 'di ba? Between the Japanese and the aggression that war could bring. And the Filipino people, parang siya yung kinailangang pumagitna na parang wait, kailangan kong protektahan yung mga Pilipino na hindi masyadong masalanta nung digmaan, 'di ba? No, so kaya 'di ba yung isang article again ni Professor Ricardo Jose, 'di ba? Yung ina-argue niya doon, napaka-delicate nung diplomacy ni Laurel between the Philippine government that was installed by the Japanese with the leadership of Laurel and the Japanese imperial government. 'Di ba? Yung ganun yung diplomacy niya na yon actually tried as much as he could to really cushion the blow of war pagdating sa mga Pilipino. So mahirap din talaga yung pagka-characterize dun sa government as a puppet government and kay Laurel as a traitor. 'Di ba? Kasi it's more than that na parang hindi siya black and white na sitwasyon na pipili ako kung magiging collaborator o magiging revolutionary. Hindi siya ganoon kasimple lalo na sa posisyon ni Laurel na naiwan, 'di ba? Na kinailangan niyang ipagpatuloy yung semblance ng governance dito sa Pilipinas, 'di ba? And syempre, as we all know, by the end of the war in 1945, The Philippines was, of course, briefly reoccupied by the United States. And the Second Republic, ceased to exist. No? So, dito na mangyayari yung I shall return ni MacArthur,
MacArthur.
diba? Para lagi ko ang sinasabi sa mga klase ko noon, diba? Na parang napaka-celebrated nung idea na I shall return, na liberation, na niliberate ng mga Amerikano. Pero yung idea din doon, bakit kailangan mag-return kung hindi umalis?
Tama.
Diba?
Ba't ka kasi umalis in the
diba?
first place, diba?
Diba? Kasi umalis yung mga Amerikano at naiwan yung likes ni Laurel to face the Japanese head-on. Diba? So, the Filipinos, never really believed in the independence under the Japanese. Yun yung isang reality kasi it was in the context of war. Or did they even have time to think about it? Yun din yung isang kailangan nating alalahanin kasi yun ba yung talagang nagmamatter sa panahon na ang concern mo ay survival?
That's true. And, after the war, Laurel and many others were ordered, arrested, and charged with treason. But he was never really brought to trial. And, in fact, noong 1948, Laurel was amnestied. His career in the government, however, continued. In fact, he will top the senatorial race in 1951. So at least makikita natin na although to a certain extent medyo naging unpopular siya or yung kanyang naging participation, pero nabawi niya at napaniwala niya yung mga Pilipino na hindi naman ako collaborator just because I want to collaborate with the Japanese. I was doing it to protect the Filipinos.
Pero ano din yan function din yan ng elite politics talaga, ng elite democracy. Yung nangyaring pag-amnesty din sa kay Laurel at sa iba niyang mga kasama.
And in this period, makikita rin natin how war participation became a credential of sorts for many Filipinos seeking public office. Kumbaga, kung ikaw ay naging soldier or naging guerrilla fighter nung World War II, pwede mo siyang gamitin credential na, I'm a Filipino hero. So, I can maybe be your president. But that's, a story for another day.
Or for the next episode. So, abangan natin yan. And if you like this episode, please support us by liking, following, or subscribing to our various social media pages. And for more information and resources, please check out our website, so www.podcast.org. So, thank you for listening and have a great day.